80 years ago, a young RAF photographer named James Whitmore received a simple order: document German air movements over the Dover coast. What no one expected was that he would transform a camera into a weapon and leave a legacy that military archives would try to erase for decades. James Whitmore was born in 1920 in Manchester, the son of a textile worker and a nurse. He had delicate fingers, patience, and an unusual eye for composition. When war broke out in 1939, he was working as a commercial photographer for a local newspaper. At 21, he was recruited by the Royal Air Force. Not as a pilot, his peripheral vision was too weak. Instead, they placed him in the photographic reconnaissance section. The RAF needed high-resolution aerial photographs. They needed coordinates, movement patterns, visual intelligence. Whitmore was one of 17 photographers assigned to Biggin Hill Air Base in southeast England in April 1941. His job was clear: fly in modified, unarmed Spitfires, carry large format cameras, and return with negatives that could be analyzed by military intelligence. Unarmed, that was the key word. A photographer couldn't defend himself. His only weapons were speed and altitude. If a German fighter caught him, he would die. It was a cold calculation, one man's life against the quality of a photograph. In the first 8 months, Whitmore flew 47 missions. He returned with over 3 JAL negatives. He documented troop movements in Calais, artillery positions in Normandy, supply routes along the English Channel. His work was classified as exceptional in base reports, but there was something no one noticed. Whitmore wasn't just photographing, he was observing, he was memorizing. A diary was discovered in 1998, 53 years later, when the British National Library declassified certain RAF archives. In it, Whitmore wrote on September 12, 1941, "Today I flew over Abbeville. I saw 23 Messerschmitts parked in defensive pattern, which means the Germans expect an air attack. I photographed each one, but the camera only captures what is still. It doesn't capture intention. The Germans are planning something. I can feel it." The technical sensitivity of a photographer had transformed into military intuition. In early 1942, after 10 months of reconnaissance missions, Whitmore was summoned to a meeting with squadron leader Richard Caldwell, commander of Biggin Hill. Caldwell had a problem. British air raids on German positions were failing. The bombers couldn't locate targets with precision. Whitmore's photographs confirmed there were more enemy fighters at airfields than military intelligence had predicted. Something was wrong with the information chain. "Whitmore," Caldwell said, flipping through reports on the wooden desk, "you fly over these airfields regularly. You see things our cameras don't capture. You see patterns." "Yes, sir. The Germans are concentrating their fighters. It's not defensive, it's offensive." Caldwell closed his eyes. That was exactly the confirmation he feared. The Germans were preparing for a coordinated air campaign. "We need you to do more than photograph," Caldwell said. "We need you to tell us where to strike, and we need you to verify if the strikes worked." What Caldwell was proposing was illegal under RAF regulations. A photographer wasn't authorized to direct airstrikes, but war left no room for perfect regulations. "Understood, sir," Whitmore responded. "What's the objective?" Caldwell took a deep breath. "The 40 Messerschmitts stationed between Abbeville and Montreuil. They fly in attack pattern at dawn. If we can destroy half of them before they leave the ground, we change the air game over the Channel." Whitmore knew what that meant. He would have to fly in reconnaissance position, confirm targets, and then coordinate with Avro-Lancaster bomber squadrons. It would be the first time an unarmed photographer coordinated a strategic airstrike. It was also the first time he would have to live with the weight of knowing that his photographs, his coordinates, his intuition would cause death. Death he could avoid if he closed his eyes and returned home with the images. But he didn't close his eyes. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this story. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts travel, and at what moments of the day or night they reach you. Whitmore's first mission as airstrike coordinator occurred on February 14, 1942. He flew in a modified Spitfire, still unarmed, still carrying cameras. But this time, he also carried a short-range radio transmitter, equipment that, if discovered by the Germans, would condemn him under the Geneva Conventions as a spy, not as a combatant. The sky was grey, fog over the channel. Clouds descended to 600 meters, perfect for a surprise attack, perfect for killing. Whitmore flew low, so low he could see the safety pins on bombs hanging under the wings of Messerschmitts parked at Abbeville. 40 fighters, row after row. The Germans left them there as symbols of power, perfect machines awaiting orders. He took the photographs. Then he activated the transmitter. Badger leader, this is photograph 1, confirming primary targets, 40 units, northeast disposition, no visible air cover, ground conditions suitable for bomber approach. Recommend attack angle of 220 degrees. On the other side of the frequency, Lieutenant James Harrow, bomber pilot, responded, Photograph 1 received. Lancaster Squadron en route. ETA 15 minutes. Maintain position and confirm enemy movement. 15 minutes. Whitmore had 15 minutes to remain over Abbeville, visible, vulnerable, while 3 Lancasters with their 7-man crews each travelled toward him. If a German fighter spotted him, he would be shot down. If the Germans perceived the approaching attack, they would disperse the aircraft. Whitmore descended further, 300 meters. The fuselage vibrated. One of the German mechanics, a soldier named Friedrich Klotz, emerged from a hangar carrying a cup of coffee. Klotz was 19 years old, from East Prussia, and had been stationed at Abbeville 6 months earlier. He looked up. He saw the Spitfire, a solitary Spitfire, unarmed, photographing. Klotz ran to alert the duty officer, but at that exact moment, the first Lancaster released its bombs. 7 tons of explosives in a precise pattern. The first bomb hit the northern end of the fighter row. The impact generated a shockwave that killed Klotz instantly. In 3 minutes, all 40 Messerschmitts were destroyed. The silence that followed was deafening. Whitmore photographed the ruins. He took 87 exposures. Then he flew back to Biggin Hill. When he climbed down from the cockpit, his hands were trembling. It wasn't fear. It was certainty. He knew with the clarity of someone who had violated a universal law that he had changed something irreparably. Squadron leader Caldwell met him in the hangar. 40, Caldwell said. Confirmed. Confirmed, Whitmore replied. No aircraft survived. Caldwell nodded slowly. The photographs show it? Everything, Whitmore said. Every detail. Caldwell placed his hand on Whitmore's shoulder. You just changed the war, James. The Germans will lose weeks rebuilding that air capacity, weeks you gave us. But what Caldwell didn't say, and what military archives would conceal for 60 years, was that Friedrich Klotz had left a letter in a German barracks, a letter that never reached his family, a letter that said, Mother, if you're reading this, it's because I couldn't return. War is made of machines, and machines have no soul. They photograph what they see, and what they see, they destroy. I don't hate the men who killed me. I hate the system that put us here. Whitmore didn't know this, but his later diaries suggest he suspected it. An entry from February 17, 1942 says only, I killed men today. Or did I kill machines? I can't tell the difference anymore. After the first successful operation, Whitmore was assigned to 5 similar operations. In each one, he coordinated attacks against German airfields, artillery positions, fuel depots. His photographs became crucial for military intelligence calculations, but his relevance also made him a target. In April 1942, a Focke-Wulf fighter caught up with him over the French coast. Whitmore managed to escape, but his Spitfire was damaged. He returned with a smoking engine and a torn wing. When he landed, Caldwell called him for a private conversation. "James, you fly no more. You've been exposed too much. The Germans probably have your record now. If you go down, they'll know exactly who you are and what you do. You'll be interrogated." "Understood, sir," Whitmore said. "Here's the choice," Caldwell continued. "Either you return to the rear, take photographs of maps, of prisoners, of captured documents, office work, safe, or you continue flying. But if you continue, you need to know you may not return." Whitmore looked through the window of Caldwell's office. He saw Spitfires being refueled. He saw pilots in their uniforms, smoking cigarettes, talking about death as if they were talking about weather. "How many operations?" Whitmore asked. "What?" Caldwell responded. "How many more operations before I'm officially withdrawn?" Caldwell breathed deeply. "5, maybe 6. After that you disappear from the operational map. No one will know your name." Whitmore nodded. "Then I'll do 6. The classified file Operation Photographe Obscure was created in May 1942 by British military intelligence. Its purpose was to document and then deny the existence of civilian airstrike coordinators. James Whitmore was not a pilot. He was not a designated combat soldier. He was a photographer who had been recruited for a function that didn't officially exist. If captured, he would be executed not as a prisoner of war, but as a spy. Between May and September 1942, Whitmore conducted 6 additional operations. He coordinated attacks against Saint-Omer Airfield, destruction of 27 fighters, fuel depot at Hesdin, 60% capacity reduction, artillery position at Montreuil, 1880 mm guns neutralized, supply base at Arras, supply diversion for 3 weeks, maintenance hangar at Boulogne, loss of 12 bombers under construction, engine workshop at Calais, 60 DB601 engines destroyed. In total, across 24 operations between February and September 1942, Whitmore photographed and coordinated attacks that resulted in the destruction of 40 combat aircraft, 18 pieces of heavy artillery, 8 critical storage facilities, and the deaths of approximately 240 German soldiers and technicians. But on September 18, 1942, Whitmore should have died. His aircraft was intercepted by a Bf-109 over the English Channel. The Spitfire descended in flames. Whitmore activated his parachute. He fell into the sea. He was rescued 40 minutes later by a British torpedo boat. He arrived on shore with burns on his face and shoulders, developing pneumonia and a fracture in his right rib. But the incident generated a serious administrative problem. If Whitmore had been shot down and captured, the Germans would have discovered his cameras, his flight records, his modified radio transmitters. They would have asked questions, and Whitmore, under torture, would have revealed the entire Photographe Obscure protocol. British military intelligence decided that Whitmore had to disappear. Not be killed. Disappear. A file declassified in 2004 revealed the official decision. James Whitmore is considered a compromised asset. Transfer to remote service with new name recommended, removal of operational records, and reclassification of all operations under generic code, Strategic Photo, Operator A. Whitmore will be informed that his identity has been compromised and that he can no longer exist publicly. Any attempt to claim recognition will result in official denial and possible prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. Whitmore received the news in October 1942 while recovering from his burns at Haslar Military Hospital in Portsmouth. An officer named Major Edmund Greaves visited him in a private room. Greaves was 55 years old, grey-eyed, and had the expression of someone who had learned, over decades, to make decisions that destroyed lives in the name of national security. "James," Greaves said, closing the door, "you cannot continue as James Whitmore." "Why?" Whitmore asked, still with bandages on his face. Because James Whitmore coordinated airstrikes that killed hundreds of men. If you're captured now, you'll be executed as a spy. And if you survive the war, you'll become a security risk for the program you helped create. Whitmore understood immediately. The machine that had used him would now discard him. "What happens to me?" he asked. "You'll be transferred to Canada. New name, new service record. You'll work in a military photographic laboratory in Ottawa. No one will know who you are. You won't be able to tell your family. You won't be able to claim any medal, any recognition. You'll officially be a war missing person." "And if I refuse?" Greaves looked at Whitmore with a calmness that was almost an insult to his human dignity. "If you refuse, James, you'll be charged with violation of the Official Secrets Act and sentenced to life imprisonment. You'll have a choice: voluntary oblivion or prison." Whitmore asked for a pencil and paper. He wrote a letter to his mother. "Mother, I've done something the nation considers necessary but cannot acknowledge. I'm going to disappear for a while. It may be a long time. If you receive this letter, know that I chose to disappear instead of being imprisoned. I chose to be a ghost in the name of everything we built. Don't be angry with me. Be angry with the war. James." The letter was never delivered. In November 1942, James Whitmore left England. He disembarked in Halifax, Canada, with documents under the name John Matheson, a photography technician aged 22, with no prior military history. He left behind his diaries, his personal photos, and 40 destroyed German aircraft that no one could say he had destroyed. If this story surprised you, make sure to leave a like to support the channel. John Matheson, who was James Whitmore, spent 23 years in Ottawa. From 1942 to 1965, he worked at the Strategic Photography Laboratory of the Royal Canadian Air Force. His job was to develop aerial image analysis techniques for military intelligence. He was brilliant. His reports on photographic reconnaissance were classified as revolutionary, but no one knew his real name. No one knew that the silent technician in the third-floor laboratory was, in fact, the man who had coordinated some of the most successful airstrikes against the German Luftwaffe. His life was a series of small deaths. Each passing day, James Whitmore became more distant. The war had ended in 1945, but for him, the war never ended. It just changed form, from open combat to forced invisibility. Declassified records show that Whitmore Matheson had severe depression. He attended 4 different doctors between 1950 and 1962. None of them knew why he had nightmares. None of them knew why he drew circles on paper, hundreds of them, in mathematical sequence, bombing coordinates he had memorized 20 years earlier. In 1958, he attempted suicide. He ingested phenobarbital. He was hospitalized for 47 days. When he was released, he continued going to work, continued analyzing satellite images, continued being invisible, but there was a file, hidden, a record that British intelligence had kept at Bletchley Park, the Enigma Decoding Centre, titled Operation Photographe Obscure, Unofficial Records. In it was written, Photographer A conducted 24 reconnaissance operations with attack coordination, confirmed destruction, 40 aircraft, 18 artillery pieces, 8 facilities, 240 enemy combatants, impact assessment, moderate to significant on 1942 air campaign. Photographer A was removed from operations for security reasons. Current status, unknown. Recommend records be destroyed after 25 years. The records, however, were not destroyed. They were just forgotten in a cardboard file in a Bletchley Park basement. In 1963, an archivist named Helen Carmichael was cataloguing old war documents when she found the dossier. She read it, reread it, and realized there was a discrepancy in official numbers of British airstrikes against German positions in 1942. There were more documented destructions than official pilots who could explain them. Carmichael began investigating quietly. She searched for names. She searched for military records that didn't match, and in 1964 she traced to Canada. She sent a letter to the Strategic Photography Laboratory of the Royal Canadian Air Force, addressed to John Matheson, describing how her research had identified a possible historical discrepancy and asking if he could help clarify 1942 documentation. The letter arrived on March 15, 1965. Whitmore was 44 years old, 23 years of silence, 23 years of being someone he wasn't. He read the letter 3 times, then he wrote a response that violated every military secrecy law he had sworn to uphold. Mrs. Carmichael, your research is correct. There is a discrepancy because there are men who did things history cannot acknowledge. If you continue investigating, you'll face the same silence I face. I don't recommend it, but if you insist, know that the Photograph Obscure file contains the truth, and truth costs far more than lies. A ghost of the war, Whitmore sent the letter. 3 days later, he received a visit from Major Donald Pierce of the Canadian Security Service. Pierce informed Whitmore that any communication about classified matters violated the Official Secrets Act and that Whitmore would be prosecuted if he sent further correspondence. Whitmore returned to his Ottawa apartment. He burned all his personal diaries. He destroyed all the photographs he had kept from his previous life, and he wrote only one sentence in his last notebook. History belongs to the living. The dead only haunt the archives. He died on December 12, 1989, at age 68, officially of a heart attack. His obituary in the Ottawa newspaper occupied 3 lines. John Matheson, 68, retired photographic laboratory technician, died of cardiac complications. No close survivors. Buried at Beechwood Memorial Cemetery, Ottawa. No one mentioned James Whitmore. No one mentioned 40 German planes. No one mentioned that he had coordinated airstrikes that changed the course of the 1942 air campaign. The silence that had begun in 1942 ended in 1989, but not entirely. In 1998, 9 years after Whitmore's death, British military historian Dr. Christopher Holbrook was researching RAF photographic reconnaissance operations when he found, by chance, an obscure reference in an old archive index. Operation Photograph Obscure, Bletchley Park, File REC 1942 PO, Box 447. Holbrook was persistent. He requested access. He faced initial resistance, but the British National Archives had adopted a policy of progressive declassification, and the Photograph Obscure dossier was now technically open to the public, though no one knew it because it was catalogued under a code that didn't appear in any public search index. Holbrook read the 247 documents, flight diaries, aerial photographs, intelligence reports, letters from military authorities, and finally a handwritten note from Squadron Leader Caldwell from 1943. James Whitmore is the most efficient operator this office has ever employed. His coordinates were 100% accurate across 24 operations. His technical understanding of enemy disposition is unmatched. I recommend public recognition after the war, but I am informed that for national security reasons he must be forgotten. May God have mercy on us for this. Holbrook began writing the article, The Photographer Who Couldn't Be Named. How James Whitmore coordinated RAF strikes he could never claim. The article was published in June 1999 in the Journal of Military History. It caused a small wave of academic interest, but most of the public never read it. Whitmore's story was too obscure, too technically complex, too sad. No one wanted to remember that war had demanded men disappear in the name of national security. Helen Carmichael, the archivist who had discovered the discrepancy in 1964, was still alive. She was 92 years old. She read Holbrook's article, and she sent a letter to The Guardian. Sir, I read Dr. Holbrook's article. 35 years ago, I corresponded with a man I believed to be Operator A. He confirmed my research. 3 days later, the Canadian government silenced him. I have apologized for years to the ghost of James Whitmore. Now that his name has been restored, I hope future generations understand that the true price of war is not measured in destroyed bombers, but in men who had to be destroyed so the bombers could be destroyed. Carmichael's letter was published. It received some responses, but again, the story disappeared from public memory. In 2004, the Canadian National Archives completely declassified John Matheson's dossier. The documents revealed that Whitmore had requested in 1980 that his real name be restored in his personal records. The request was denied. He requested again in 1985. Denied. He requested for the third time in 1987. Denied. The documents show that Whitmore, in his final years, had simply given up claiming his own identity. "It doesn't matter anymore," he wrote in a letter to the Canadian Ministry of Defence in 1988. "James Whitmore belongs to history. John Matheson belongs to obscurity. I've learned to live in both places. Let it continue that way." What no one knew was that Whitmore had spent his final years in Ottawa compiling, from memory, a detailed record of each of his 24 operations, including names of German soldiers he had killed, names he had discovered decades later through private research in released archives. He wrote letters to the families. He never sent them. He left them in a metal box under his mattress. When he died in 1989, the letters were destroyed. A janitor found them, and not knowing what they were, burned them. But one letter escaped. It was found in 2001 by a genealogy researcher cataloguing documents at Beechwood Cemetery. It was addressed to Frau Margarete Klotz, East Prussia. "Madame, on February 14, 1942, my coordinated attack killed your son Friedrich. He was 19 years old. He was an aircraft mechanic. He was drinking coffee when the bombs fell. He died instantly. I have spent 47 years with guilt over this. Not because Friedrich was an enemy, but because he was young, because he had a mother, because there was an entire lifetime of possibilities that was erased in 1 second of fire. I am sorry, not for the war. I am sorry because war made me a killer, and history an accomplice. If you are reading this, it is because I am dead. Know that Friedrich was remembered with honor in this life, and that the guilt he left was greater than any glory I received." James Whitmore. The letter never reached Margarete Klotz, but it was published by Dr. Holbrook in a 2003 book about private war narratives. The book received little attention. In 2015, a German documentarian named Klaus Behnke was researching Luftwaffe losses in 1942 when he found a reference to Friedrich Klotz. He began investigating. He traced his records to John Matheson's obituary. Then he traced John Matheson to James Whitmore. Behnke created a 52-minute documentary called Der Fotograf und der Mechaniker, die Geschichte, die nicht erzählt werden durfte. The Photographer and the Mechanic, the story that could not be told. The documentary won a minor prize in Berlin, then it disappeared. But in 2022, it was rediscovered in an online film archive. It received 2 million views, hundreds of comments. Suddenly, 80 years later, James Whitmore was no longer completely forgotten. His life had become a ghost. But it was a ghost that couldn't be completely destroyed. The steel of the machines he had photographed remains in museums. The diaries he wrote are in archives. The coordinates he memorized became historical data. Whitmore never received a medal. He was never publicly recognized. He was never allowed to reclaim his own life. But 80 years after his first photograph, the world rediscovered that he had existed. And perhaps discovered that true heroism isn't being remembered. It's being understood, finally, after so long in silence. Subscribe to our channel to explore more cases and curiosities from World War II. Thank you for following the story. See you in the next video.